So this gate exists because of this guy.
You ready? You ready? You ready?
This is Gus, our adorable new rescue dog. According to the vet, he was probably trained as a hunter, which means that it's going to take a while for us to be able to introduce him to our cats. They live upstairs while he lives downstairs. And we don't love this as a long-term solution, so I'm going to build a door that the cats can get through, but the dog can't. I'm using a process here I learned from a YouTube woodworker named John Heiss, building a door out of 3 layers of 1/2-inch plywood. So I'm going to start by breaking down the sheet of plywood. So once it's broken down far enough that I can safely run it through the table saw by myself, I'll break it down further using my cheapo outfeed table there. Going to need to do a future project building an outfeed table. I sketched out a few design ideas to begin with, but basically designed as I went. So here we're trying to figure out, what size circle do we actually want at the bottom of the door that the cats can get through, but the dog cannot. Once we decided on the size, it was time to cut the hole, which is really fun if you've ever done with a router. So I just punched a hole in the center where the center of the router jig will go. Now I'm trying to peel the double-sided tape off. This board is going to go on the back of the circle underneath and attach so that once the router cuts the circle out, it will still be held in place and it won't jam. So this is my totally makeshift circle jig attached to my router. There goes the nail into that center hole. Tap it down. And then you carefully turn the router on and trace the circle. I like to have the cord over my shoulder so it's out of the way of the tool. And it's a plunge router, so I can go in part way and then work my way back and forth. And I'll jump forward a little bit here so you can see I'm pulling the pin out now. And then off comes the very expensive router jig. Joking there, it's not expensive at all. And you can see the circle's cut out, but it's held in place by the double-sided tape. And there it is. That's how you cut a circle with a router. Now I'm going to cut a little window on either side of that porthole, and I'm drilling holes here to cut with the jigsaw. The blue tape is there. I put it down and then laid down the marks, because with the blue tape on, the jigsaw is not going to tear up as much grain on the surface of the wood. It's just going to make for a cleaner cut. With the holes cut out on either side, I ripped a couple of dowels in half so that I could use those to cover the exposed grain on either the left and right side of each hole. So I'm attaching those here, and I'm using some of the CA glue and regular wood glue. So the CA glue will cure super fast and hold everything in place while the wood glue dries. So those windows are going to be barred, the windows on either side of the porthole, and I'm drilling some holes here to separate the strips or the dowels so that they're spaced evenly. And the best way to do something like this that I know of is to put that little dowel in the jig that I have on the drill press there, drill a hole, and then slide the whole workpiece over and put the new hole on top of the dowel. And then that way each hole is equally spaced. Having a little trouble getting that back on there, but that's the idea. Jumping ahead here so you can see me drilling another set of holes down the other side, and eventually I'll have the whole thing drilled out with evenly spaced holes, and then we'll go on to the next step. Then it's back to the table saw to rip that piece down so that what I end up with is 2 strips that basically are just the correctly spaced holes. So I'm cutting off the outside edge first for each one, and then I'll go back, set the fence, and rip each strip. Oop, another trim on that one. And then I'll go back and rip each strip into something that I can use that will evenly space my dowels. So that'll come off, and then I'll cut it to length and use that to install the dowels. You'll see in a minute. Or maybe you won't see because I forgot to record the assembly of that part. But basically, there's a section of that drilled strip on the top and bottom of each of the holes on either side of the portal, and they're holding the dowels in place. And it's the strip with the holes in it itself that's been glued into place. The dowels are actually just captured in there. Now things start to move a little more quickly. I'm gluing the edge piece on one side. So this is the doubler that looks like the rails of, or will look like the rails of the door when I'm done here. So it's being installed. It overhangs by a little more than a 1/2 inch the main door plate that it's being glued to. And you'll see why this all works out here in a minute. Holding those doubling strips in place with a couple of 18 gauge pin nails. And then I'm going to put the other side on and clamp the whole thing down to the table so that as it dries, any curvature to the plywood gets flattened out and the door ends up nice and straight. Before I put the doubling strips on, I gave that basic core piece of the door a good sanding on the other side, and now I've flipped it over to put the doubling strips on the other side of the door, so I'm giving it a good sanding here on this side. Here are the second edge doubler strips going on the other side, and that's what gets you to the full 1.5 inch thickness. And the kind of neat aspect of this easy construction method is it's just 3 layers of 1/2 inch plywood that gets you to the 1.5 inch thickness that is what most standard doors are. I'm sure you get the idea now, but here's the bottom piece going in. And we'll have pieces around the whole edge, obviously, before we're done. Okay, this may be hard to see here, but this is what the edge banding of the door looks like. That piece I just pulled off, if the cross section of it in profile looks like a T. So the little tongue fits in between the 2 outer pieces of plywood, and the tongue was just a tiny bit too long, so I'm using my hand plane to plane down the base of the T there to fit those pieces in so that they're nice and snug, because ideally you want them basically to disappear around the edge of the door once it's painted. And it's edge banding assembly time. You can see my clamps underneath the door holding the side pieces of edge banding in place, and I'm using construction adhesive rather than wood glue here, because construction adhesive will give me a longer, what's called a longer open time, which gives me more time to manipulate this piece into place because I want to get it lined up just right. So I'm going to put that piece in, and then you'll notice I've also got a clamp across the top of the surface of the door there that's bridged up on that wood block, and that is precisely so I can attach these clamps here to the bar of that clamp and get some pressure onto the edge banding. I don't have any long enough to run from the top to the bottom of the door. That would be the obvious thing to do. Any clamps long enough. And the other thing about this is you want the glue to hold it in place. You don't want to have to tack it with nails, because later I'm going to trim the top and the sides of the door to the final size, and I want to keep nails away from the edge so that my saw blade doesn't have to chew through them. Once everything is the way I like it, I am going to drive some 18 gauge brads in there, but you can see I'm doing it from the face of the door about an inch away from the edge, so these will be well away from where the blade's going to pass through for the final cuts that I'm going to make to bring the door to its final size. These edge banding pieces were cut from a 2x4, and they're just a little bit wider than the width of the door, which is just fine with me because the flush trim router bit does a great job to bring it down so that everything's in the same plane. Another round of sanding here, now that everything's basically assembled and starting to look like a door. This is where I take a deep breath, measure again, and then trim the door down to size. Here's the trim of the width, the final trim. Those playing cards are holding the door in place so I can mark where the hinge mortises go and where the doorknob needs to go. And playing cards are great for that. Here's the jig for cutting the hole for the doorknob. Driving it in and then reversing the drill as I back it out because it seems to clear the chips out better that way. I'll go halfway through. I keep checking to see if the pilot bit has come through the other side. And then when it does, I'll finish the hole on the other side and then change hole saws to drill the shaft for the tongue that holds the door in place when it's closed. One of the more painstaking parts of building this way is you want to go back and cover any exposed end grain of the plywood where you can see the laminate edge with some kind of molding or edge banding. And when I've done this before, I've purchased molding and used that to cover these areas. But I had enough lying around that I decided to cut my own little strips here. And so I'm using CA glue and wood glue again so the CA glue will set and hold everything in place while the wood glue dries. And it's kind of painstaking, but you go around and you cover all the edges, and then the final product actually looks quite good. So here I'm doing that same process around the edge of the small windows here. And I decided, because these are so close to the floor and they're going to be harder to see, that I'm just going to shoot these into place with little pin nails. Here I've made and forgot to film that I was making the door that covers the porthole when we need to close it so the cats can't go through. I've marked where the little 1/2-inch hinge mortises go, and I'm cutting them on the table saw with my little tiny table saw sled. There's one. Checking to see if the hinge fits, and there goes the other. And here we are priming and painting. I love these little microfiber rollers, and I rarely use a pan for them. I just kind of dip them right into the can. Works well with a gallon-sized can. You can reach right in there, as you'll maybe see in a minute. One thing I forgot to mention was that I went back and countersunk all those nails to make sure they were below the surface of the wood, and then filled them with wood filler so that the paint would be nice and smooth over the top. And then I finally figured out a way that I could paint both sides of the door without having to wait for them to dry. So that thing is just suspending it from the ceiling, and I can flip it back and forth. There's a nice cross section of what the edge banding looks like stuck in there. So here's the fun part, just putting everything together. Installing the little 1/2-inch hinges on the tiny door. And here's the little wooden door installed with a tiny toggle to keep it closed. And here's me pushing from underneath to make sure the toggle is strong enough to keep the door closed. Here's the doorknob going in. This is a pretty easy process, but it's fun because as you do it, it starts to make the whole thing look like a door. All right, so I've test fitted the door again, and I scribed out where this hinge mortise needs to go. And now I'm just gonna chisel it out. So that's a very pleasing fit. We use the self-centering drill bit to put the first screw in here. And there we go. We're on our way. Got the door all lined up now, and I'm going through the process of attaching the door itself to the hinge. And I've used the playing cards again underneath the door to get it just at the right height so that it's easy to drill and put the screws in. And here's me swinging it shut for the first time, and look at that. Time to install the striker plate, and look at that. Wow. I am happy with that fit. So here's the final tour. This is what we've ended up with. Here's what it looks like from the hallway. And it feels good. It feels solid because it's 3 layers of plywood. And here's what it looks like on the inside. Got that little wooden toggle that I showed you. And then when you open it, this little magnet keeps it open. So we can have it open and the cats can decide when they want to come out, or if we need to keep the dog and the cat separate, we just keep it closed. A little bit of touch-up paint, we're done. Thanks for watching.